You're standing in an open field. It's midday. The sun is bright, the sky is clear, and then, over the course of about a minute, the world starts dying. Not literally, but it feels like it. The light drains out of everything. The temperature drops. Birds go silent. Animals that should be awake start acting like it's dusk. And then the sun itself, the one constant, unchanging, permanent fixture of your entire existence, the thing every single day of your life has depended on, gets slowly devoured by a black circle until there's nothing left but a ring of fire hanging in a suddenly dark sky. If you didn't know what a solar eclipse was, this wouldn't just be strange. This would be, quite reasonably, the most terrifying thing you had ever witnessed. And for the overwhelming majority of human history, nobody knew what an eclipse was. Let's be honest about something first. We like to imagine ancient humans as either clueless cave people screaming at shadows, or as secret astronomers who calmly track the cosmos like it was no big deal. Neither one is quite right. What actually happened is stranger and more human than either extreme. Across almost every civilization on record, independently, without any contact with each other, ancient humans came to the exact same terrifying conclusion about what an eclipse meant. Something was eating the sun. In ancient China, the character for eclipse literally translates to eat. Court astronomers recorded solar eclipses as far back as 720 BC, and the belief was that a celestial dragon was consuming the sun whole. This wasn't a quiet, personal superstition. It was a full-blown national emergency. When an eclipse began, the entire population would grab pots, pans, drums, anything that made noise, and bang on them as loudly and violently as humanly possible. The goal was simple: scare the dragon into spitting the sun back out. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. It worked. Every single time. The sun always came back, which meant, from their perspective, the noise-making wasn't superstition. It was a proven, tested 100% effective technique for saving the entire world. Why would you ever stop doing something with a perfect track record? The Vikings had their own version of the same fear, except their monster wasn't a dragon. It was wolves. Norse mythology describes two wolves, Skoll and Hati, eternally chasing the sun and moon across the sky. An eclipse meant one of them had finally caught its prey. And just like in China, the solution involved as much noise as a population could physically generate, because if the wolves were startled, they'd let go. Now here's where it gets darker. In Mesoamerica, among the Aztec, Maya, and Inca civilizations, solar eclipses weren't just feared. They were treated as one of the single most dangerous events that could happen to a society, and the response sometimes escalated into human sacrifice. The Aztec believed an eclipse represented a genuine cosmic battle, a moment where the forces of darkness might permanently overpower the sun, and if that happened, it wasn't just night that would fall. It was the actual, literal end of the world. Codices describe rituals involving bloodletting and sacrifice specifically timed to eclipses, offerings made not out of ceremony, but out of raw, functional panic. These weren't people performing tradition for tradition's sake. These were people who genuinely believed that if they didn't act correctly, immediately, and with sufficient sacrifice, the sun simply wouldn't return, and everyone they had ever loved would die in permanent darkness. Let's pause on that for a second, because it's worth really sitting with the psychology here. Imagine believing, with complete sincerity, that the ongoing existence of daylight itself was not guaranteed, that every single eclipse was a coin flip between the world continuing and the world ending, and the only variable standing between those two outcomes was whether your community performed the correct ritual quickly enough. That is an almost unbearable amount of pressure to put on a group of people with no telescopes, no orbital mechanics, and no way of knowing this had ever happened before and always ended fine. And this fear wasn't limited to any one continent or culture. In ancient Mesopotamia, Babylonian astronomers developed some of the earliest systems for predicting eclipses, and even they treated an eclipse as a specific omen targeting the king. The belief was so intense that, during predicted eclipses, a temporary substitute king would be installed, an unfortunate volunteer who would take the throne, and by extension, absorb whatever cosmic punishment the eclipse represented while the real king hid. After the eclipse passed, the substitute king was, depending on the era and account, quietly removed from power or in some darker versions of the tradition, executed, having served his purpose as a kind of cosmic lightning rod. Somebody, somewhere, in ancient Babylon, was once told they were going to be king for a day, specifically because the sun was about to briefly vanish and someone needed to metaphysically take the hit. Here's the detail that should really make this click for you, though. This fear wasn't irrational. It was actually an extremely reasonable response given the information available. If your entire understanding of the universe is built on the sun being permanent, unchanging, and absolute, and then one day it starts disappearing in broad daylight with zero warning, the rational conclusion isn't this is a predictable astronomical alignment of three celestial bodies. The rational conclusion is something has gone catastrophically wrong with the single most important object in existence. These weren't stupid people making silly mistakes. These were intelligent people drawing the most logical possible conclusion from an event that, without modern astronomy, looks exactly like the sky breaking. And there's a reason this fear shows up almost identically across cultures that never had contact with each other. Total darkness arriving suddenly, in the middle of the day, without the normal hues of sunset, triggers something ancient and hardwired in the human nervous system. Remember, for most of human history, night was the most dangerous time to be alive. Predators hunted in darkness. Humans were vulnerable in darkness. So when daylight itself starts vanishing without any of the usual gradual warning of an approaching sunset, the brain doesn't process it as astronomy. It processes it as an emergency. The same evolutionary alarm system that kept your ancestors alive by making them fear the dark was going off at full volume in the middle of the afternoon. There's actually a famous story that shows just how powerful this fear could be, even used deliberately. When Christopher Columbus and his crew were stranded in Jamaica in 1504, running desperately low on supplies, the local indigenous population had grown tired of feeding them and stopped cooperating. Columbus, who had a calendar of upcoming astronomical events, knew a lunar eclipse was coming. He warned the local leaders that his god was angry and would turn the moon blood red as punishment. When the eclipse hit exactly as predicted, panic broke out, and the terrified population rushed to bring food and supplies, begging for the moon to be restored. Columbus, having timed it carefully, restored the moon right as the eclipse ended. It's a genuinely uncomfortable piece of history, a moment where deep, universal human fear of the sky breaking was calculated and weaponized by someone who simply had better information. So the next time you hear that a solar eclipse is coming, and you casually pull out a pair of paper glasses to watch it like it's a fun afternoon event, remember what that exact same sky once meant to nearly every human who ever lived before you. For most of our species' existence, the sun disappearing wasn't a scheduled celestial curiosity. It was the closest thing to proof that the world itself could end, and it usually took banging pots, spilled blood, or a sacrificed king to bring it back. We didn't figure out the truth because we were smarter than them. We figured it out because, eventually, someone counted enough eclipses to notice the pattern. Until then, humanity spent thousands of years genuinely believing they were personally responsible for saving the sun, and every single time, they succeeded. Which, honestly, might be the most human thing about this entire story.